Welcome to Crushgasm, the podcast dedicated to the highs and lows of crushes. From their first to their worst, we're going to cover them all with a cascade of characters, including our guest today, someone you'll always find ringside, Stephanie Hardy, a Grey's Anatomy loving queen, host, and commentator who is here to talk not only about her show, Hardy Wrestling Podcast, and her work with the BellaDonna Division, but also her crush on a WWE superstar, Gigi Dolin. Stephanie, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Have you watched any good wrestling lately?
Well, yeah. I was watching wrestling just last night. I was watching WWE SmackDown and AEW Rampage. I watch wrestling every week, but I'm having to sort of watch both of those shows on Fridays because I work with Women's Wrestling Talk, which is on Fite TV and other streaming platforms. And we do an after show. Me and Drian Santana, we do an after show where we talk about all the things that happen on SmackDown and Rampage. And we just, chop it up and talk about wrestling in that way. So yeah, a lot of great wrestling is going on. Today is Royal Rumble Day, which is one of the biggest pay-per-views that WWE has, which leads to WrestleMania in April with really big implications. So it's lots of cool stuff going on in wrestling, but it always is. So yeah.
So this is like the season for a wrestling fan right now. Just like, yes. Except for SummerSlam. I mean, that's coming up, that's like July or something usually.
Yeah, that's usually around August. So that's way after WrestleMania, but it's still one of the bigger pay-per-views that they have as well.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I read that Gigi sort of was introduced to wrestling by her younger brother, which was exactly how I kind of got into it my freshman year of high school, way back when. Won't say the year, date myself. If I say my favorite wrestler, I will date myself. But what about yourself? What initially drew you towards wrestling?
Well, what drew me towards wrestling was the fact that my dad was watching it one day at my grandma's house, and she used to watch wrestling as well. So that's how he got into it. And so one day, I was about 4 years old. I was walking in and he was watching WCW. And around the time, the bigger people at the time were like Goldberg, your Hollywood Hulk Hogan's with the NWO and stuff like that. And they were fighting in a match. And I believe it was for the World Heavyweight title too. And I asked him who these people were, and he told me, and I kind of just sat there and watched it. And I never really quit. There was a small period of time where around the early 2000s where I did stop, but then I picked it right back up around 2002 and just never quit. And really the thing that I love about wrestling is just watching these people who have this conflict, really fight each other. And then there's always some other form of entertainment within wrestling that I could relate to as well, because I love the Nitro Girls growing up. I used to dance with them because they were like this dancing team, kind of like a Laker girl would be, but they would fight on Monday Night Nitro on WCW, and I would dance with them every time they came on TV as well. So everything about wrestling just kind of drew me in, and I never left it, and I've just always loved it.
That's so interesting. Your grandma was the OG fan of the family. Like, did you ever know why she got into it?
Not really. And I'm sad that I can't ask her now at this point in life because she has passed on. But I really don't know exactly what it was that kind of drew her to it. I know her favorite wrestler of all time was Ric Flair. But as far as knowing what got her into it, I'm not exactly sure. I just know she used to go watch wrestling matches at the Boutwell Auditorium here in Birmingham, Alabama, which is pretty historic. And it has historic ties to wrestling, but a lot of people may not know that. But it's like she would go to wrestling matches all the time, and then she would watch it on TV. And I'm guessing that's how my dad got into it. And then, he got me into it, as, time went on. So yeah, it's just been a family affair.
Well, shout out to Grandma. That's really interesting. Maybe it was because wrestling always has this sort of soap opera feel, and it's very theatrical too. That's what I loved about it. I love that you could take a week off, take maybe a few years off, but then you watch it and you're just like right back in within 5 minutes. You're like, yes, all right, caught up into it.
Yeah, it never ends. Like, I think that's one of the best parts about wrestling as a sport. Even though it does have entertaining qualities to it, it's like it's still very much an athletic, feat, and it never stops like the way that other sports do, where they have an off season. Wrestling is never wrestling never has an off season. It just keeps going. And even when you miss like maybe a week or two due to life stuff or work stuff or whatever, I mean, and even now it's easier to catch up on it because we have social media and other, options to watch stuff. You are never really behind on it. So it's great.
Yeah, it's year round. My brother was into it. I was into it for a while. Now my nephew, who's be 10 years old soon, he's really into it. So it keeps on going, never stops.
Right. It's cool that way.
Yeah, so how'd you first come to know Gigi? Because she's been around a while actually, because she got signed to the WWE. So where'd you first see her?
So I had to think back a little bit because she had been there before, but then she left for a little while and came back. So the first time I saw Gigi, she was known as Priscilla Kelly in the Independents. And I saw her in this former event that WWE used to do. It was an all-female wrestling tournament called the Mae Young Classic. And that's named after one of the pioneers of women's wrestling, Mae Young. And they would have this tournament and bring in the best of the best women's wrestlers from all over the world to fight in this tournament to win a trophy and to have an opportunity at a women's title at some point. And the first time I saw her, she just looked really unique. And I was just like, wow, like I had never seen her before. I thought, this, like, she was just interesting looking. And it wasn't until years later when she came back to the NXT brand where I saw her and just felt like, her look, everything she had changed about her look when she became Gigi Dolin was just really interesting. She just looked like almost like a macabre witch or something. And I was just like, I love her. Like, I just love her. And I just love the way she looked. I love her hair, like everything she wore. Like the fact that she comes out to the ring, holding a rose, and then she just antagonizes people, and she has these crazy looks on her face and stuff. Like, she's just in her own little world. And I think that's just interesting.
So would you say that's what made her stand out as your WWE crush? Because there are so many to pick from. I mean, even if you go back to your grandma watching Ric Flair to now, there's like millions of wrestlers.
Yeah, like that's one thing that sort of made it stand out. But I have, of course, like other crushes as well in WWE since I've been watching it for a very long time. But, if I were to narrow it down to just right now, it really is Gigi. Like, she's just so pretty. And it's just like, she's also really talented as a wrestler as well. And of course, she's a champion now. She's one half of the NXT Women's Tag Team Champions along with JC Jane. And she's a part of a faction called Toxic Attraction, which is led by Mandy Rose, who is also a beautiful woman as well. And she's the NXT Women's Champion. So really all of them in this group are, draped in gold. And they're really talented. But then on top of it, they also look good as well. So it's just they just ooze sexiness, and it's just crazy.
Speaking of her sexiness, I was looking at her pictures, and her style, like a handful of other women right now in wrestling, reminds me of kind of like, I don't know if you remember the Suicide Girls from the MySpace era. They're very Sunset Strip, very rock and roll. Would you say a lot of your crushes lean towards that aesthetic and that style?
Sometimes they do, and then other times they don't. I think it just depends on where I am in my life. But I really do like unique looking, men and women who don't necessarily look like, the average everyday person that you would have a crush on, that's cute in their own way, in a very independent sort of way. And then there's another girl in WWE who I like, whose name is Shotzi, and she kind of has that look as well. She has green hair and she's very rockerish as well. So I guess maybe that is a type. I'm not sure.
Well, maybe you do. I'm wondering how, like, my nephew watching, how his crushes will develop as he gets older. Will he lean towards rock and roll? Will he lean towards the muscular men? I don't know. He's only 9. Don't know what he's into yet. Right now,
time.
Yeah, right now he's a single dad to a stuffed animal donkey named Churro. So,
Oh, that's cute.
yeah. So I want to go back before her wrestling because she had some like reality TV. She was on My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding. Did you go back and watch that at all?
No, I didn't, but I did hear about that in passing, and I guess in sort of looking up other things about her. I didn't really go back and watch it because I'm not really that much of a reality show person, but I do respect it as a genre because I know a lot of people, even wrestlers, do get a little bit of their start or more exposure, on reality television. And I do respect that, and I like that because I just think that's a really unique way to sort of start yourself out that way. And I could imagine someone like her being on a show like that. I can imagine that.
I think I've seen a couple of them. They do get pretty wild, those the gypsy wedding shows. I love all wedding shows, but that one took it a bit too far for me. I like the more say yes to the dress type ones, the basic ones.
Oh, me too. I love Say Yes to the Dress.
Yes, I'm obsessed. I've been watching, I just got Discovery Plus. So I was like, oh my God, you can watch them all now. And I've been obsessed with Big Bliss. I like plus size. It's only 4 seasons, but it's in Kleinfeld and they do the plus size brides. It's really good. Check it out.
Oh, that sounds good.
So Gigi is a part of, is it NXT WWE?
Yeah, it's WWE NXT 2.0. They just did a rebrand of their NXT brand. And the thing about NXT is that it sort of started as a developmental brand where they sort of have these newer wrestlers who come in from the performance center that WWE has in Orlando, Florida, or they come from various sports backgrounds or even various wrestling backgrounds from like the independents. And they sort of go on this show to sort of have a little bit of exposure and sort of like a breeding ground for newer people outside of the older people that you would see on, say, Raw or SmackDown. And over time, it started to grow over the past 7 or 8 years. It started to grow into its own brand that wasn't so developmental because a lot of the talent that they had, both men and women, were so good that they started to almost overshadow the other two brands. And it's really great. And then they've just done this rebrand about maybe 5 months ago where they're putting newer stars out there with more personality outside of their wrestling ability, and it's pretty good so far. So really that's what Gigi and her crew Toxic Attraction are a part of, and NXT is really great. It comes on Tuesdays on USA at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern, and everywhere else you are. So yeah, that's pretty much what NXT is. It's really cool.
So do you think she even needs to develop even more to go to SmackDown and Raw, or is this NXT kind of a great place to be too? Because I know everybody knows Monday Night Raw. It's kind of like, even if you don't know wrestling, you know that.
Right. And yeah, the thing about Gigi is it's like, of course, like I said, she's a champion now on NXT. So if she were to decide that she would want to stay on NXT, it wouldn't be the worst thing for her career at all, because NXT is such a great show. Like, it's really great. And I would say it's almost on the level of a Raw or SmackDown, even though Raw and SmackDown are both older than NXT. So if she were to decide to just stay there, I wouldn't be mad at her at all. And she would be in, good straits with that. But if she did come to Raw or SmackDown, it would be pretty okay, but I'm not sure if she would have the opportunity to have so much attention on her, simply because there's just so much talent on both shows.
Yeah, and today there seems to be so many more female wrestlers than back when I was growing up. I think it was like Lita, Trish Stratus, and then what's the one with the long legs? Whose name is
Stacy Keibler?
Yeah, Stacy Keibler. I was like, legs for days. And now it seems like they're no longer just around for the one-off matches and like to be kind of just arm candy. It seems like the women are getting so much more attention. Why do you think that is?
Well, I know exactly why that is. It's a pretty long story, but the thing about wrestling is wrestling's been along for such a long time. And women in wrestling have had to fight for so much equality in terms of time and being able to show their athleticism. And there would be pockets of times where they would be able to wrestle real matches like the men sporadically, but never having equal time or equal opportunity in that way. And the time in which you said you were watching it, it's like you had Trish Stratus and you had Lita, and then you also had other women who were just as athletic, like you had China and different women like her and Jacqueline and Jazz and stuff like that, who would do athletic things, but they weren't given as much time or as much appreciation with that as much as the men would. See, now, due to a groundswell of support from a lot of the fans, especially with the social media age, a lot of fans were really pushing for the women to do more, because this is a different time now. You have women dominating in just about every sport that you can think of. So why isn't it, as prevalent in WWE television? Like, it was prevalent in other wrestling companies like Impact Wrestling, and also on the independents as well, and NWA and stuff like that. But it wasn't as important in WWE, which is the most mainstream wrestling product that people know. And the fans were pushing for, them to give the women a chance. And they had a hashtag in 2015, which started, the Give Divas a Chance movement. And at that point, NXT had, their crop of women that were having 15-minute and 20-minute matches, just like the men would. And they wanted more for them. And the more we started clamoring for it, the more they started, putting it out there. And even though it was a slow change, WWE has made that change, and it's been really great to see and witness these women who are so talented and are beautiful, of course, but they're just as talented, if not more talented, than the men are, and they can grab you and can be the reason why you sit and watch wrestling for hours on end, and not just the men too. And it's really great that that's been happening. Like, they're not just, here for the looks and stuff like that. They're here to give you a quality match, and sometimes they'll even main event a show, and that's normal now. So it's great that this is happening.
For sure. And you mentioned her, China. She is a wrestler that I think, even like I was saying, Monday Night Raw, if you're not a fan, you know what that is. China is someone who was a household name. Even if you didn't know wrestling, you knew China and you knew The Rock, or you knew Stone Cold. Do you have any prediction of who might be the next household name in female wrestling?
Well, for right now, at this point, I would say that when it comes to a household name, there is no one much more household than Bianca Belair right now in terms of WWE, because she is just the full package. She has athleticism, she has charisma, she has the look, like she just has everything about her that just makes you love her. She calls herself the EST of WWE. That means she's the strongest, the fastest, the roughest, the toughest, the quickest, the best. And when I think of somebody, when it's like I can talk to somebody at work on my everyday job, and they may not watch wrestling, but they know her because of her look and her braid and all of the above and all the stuff that she does. And it's just, when it comes to female wrestling, she just has everything that you would want in a superstar and more. And she's only going to get better from here. Like, she and another woman, Sasha Banks, were the first two Black women to ever main event a WrestleMania last year for a major title. And that was insane. And a lot of people, even outside of wrestling, had to take notice of that. And because of that, and because of her being able to win the SmackDown Women's Championship at that time, that put a lot of eyes, on wrestling in terms of WWE with women and stuff like that. So I would say she would definitely be the best household name that I can think of for right now. And then also in AEW, you have Jade Cargill, who is the TBS champion. Like, she has the capabilities to be a household name in wrestling as well. So women's wrestling is growing everywhere, and it's just great to see. And there's just so much talent available.
It sounds like the women are getting more representation. The Black women in wrestling are getting a lot more representation. And your crush on Gigi made me want to know, is there a lot of LGBTQ representation coming up in wrestling that maybe I don't know of because I'm not watching as much?
Well, there is one woman in WWE who does identify as a lesbian. Her name is Sonya Deville. She just had a match last night with Naomi, who is another great Black female superstar. She, in the past year, She hasn't really been wrestling, but she's more so of an official backstage who makes matches and stuff like that. But she's more of a evil role. But she definitely identifies, as a lesbian, but she hasn't really been able to put that out there within a storyline. But on social media, she does, participate in lots of, gay pride things, and she's an advocate for LGBTQ rights. And that is really good in that sense. But as far as any other females, I really can't think of any at the moment. Well, actually, that's not true. There's Kiera Hogan. She used to wrestle for Impact, but she wrestles for AEW and other places as well. She's also in an open relationship with a woman as well. And I believe there's Tasha Steelz as well. So with that, you have representation of lesbians in wrestling as well.
That's good. And you mentioned one of them has kind of this villain role, and the wrestlers are always going back and forth if they're the villain this month or the hero. Do you think with Gigi, like her role, if she was a villain or this or that, kind of impact your crush a bit?
I don't think so.
No, you're like, she's so cool. No, you just go with the flow of whatever your favorite does.
Yes.
That's how I was. I'm a big Jeff Hardy fan.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Like, that's my brother in my head because we got the same last name and stuff. So
that's what my brother was watching, and I saw him and I was like, who is that? And I was like, oh my God, I still have this one Jeff Hardy toy that it's still in the box. He has coveted it for so long, and now my nephew wants it, and I'm like, no, it's still mine, it's still with me. It's one of the only one. I gave him a lot of my old wrestling toys, but it was just this one that I was like, I can't part with this one. You can have all my other ones, all my Alita, all my Hardy Boys, but not this one.
I totally get it.
Do you collect the toys?
I actually don't. Really, the closest thing I have to toys at this point are like Funko Pops, and I only have one wrestling related Funko Pop, and it's of Becky Lynch. She's another wrestler as well. She's currently the Raw Women's Champion. I have one for her because I got it at a sale at GameStop when I was buying a Funko Pop for my boyfriend. So really, there's really just that one. And I believe I got as a gift, I believe my dad gave me a Naomi action figure and a Rock action figure. So yeah, those are really the only three wrestling related toys that I have.
Well, they got to get a Gigi one out there for you.
Oh, they do. They have to make a Bianca Belair Funko Pop because I really want that really bad.
I'm sure Funko's on it. They make just about everybody nowadays.
They do. I'm so excited. They even have a set for Grey's Anatomy, and I'm so excited, but I have no room for it.
There's always room if you love it enough. Trust me.
Yeah, that's a good philosophy to have.
Yeah, I'm an organized hoarder. So, and I only get the Funkos that I like. I'm not like a big collector of them as just things, but if I like the character or whatever, I'll get them. And I just got a new one is from Frasier, is his brother. I was like, yay. So we like to wrap up our crush portion sort of on Fantasy Island. So if you and Gigi could be together and be this like WWE power couple, what do you think your lives would be like?
I almost feel like it would be very passionate. Like, I feel like it would be very passionate, and then it would just be kind of laid back in a sense, and we would just talk a lot. But once the passion starts, it would just be really passionate.
I like that. I don't think anyone's ever gone with that answer. They're always like, I don't know. No one's ever gone with the passion. That's what it should be on Fantasy Island with your crush. So, but now that the fantasy, we've gone to the fantasy, we'll come back to reality. We started with how you got to be a wrestling fan, but I want to know what made you want to take your passion for just watching and turn it into like a sort of career for yourself.
Well, it started in 2020, shortly before the pandemic. I was a part of a Facebook group where you talked about wrestling, on a weekly basis, right? And make all kinds of posts or whatever. And I was one of the administrators of the group. I was the only female administrator of the group. The rest of them were men. And we had talked about starting a podcast, but it never happened. And then to fast forward, me and the group fell out and I wound up leaving it. And it's just like, I really didn't have anywhere to really put all of my thoughts about wrestling together in a format that was, conducive for social media or for what's going on. So I decided, since I still had the apps on my phone to record a podcast, I was like, you know what? I guess maybe I should start one. But the thing is, I tried to get a co-host or something. Like I asked my boyfriend if he wanted to do it with me, and I asked other friends who love wrestling as well if they wanted to do it with me, and they said no. So I guess I was just like, oh, well, I guess I have to do this myself. And it was around this time, which was Royal Rumble time, where I said I was going to do it because it was such a big wrestling week. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start it and I'm just going to do it and we'll just see what happens. And my first episode, which was entitled Random Girl, Random Podcast, was 30 minutes. But the more I started doing it and the more I started organizing how each episode was going to go, I started getting into it. And then when I started crafting my social media and people started noticing what I was doing, people from all over the country, of course, this was during the pandemic, were starting to take notice and they were wanting to help me out because they could tell I was new and stuff. But I love podcasting, so very much because it allows me to use my voice and all of the things that I'm passionate about and put it towards wrestling in a way that's healthy and that makes sense to me. And it might help it make sense to other people as well, because everybody can listen to it. Like, I try to pattern it in a way to where people who are diehard wrestling fans and people who may not be diehard wrestling fans can listen to it and still feel like they can be, they can understand and grasp everything that's going on. And I also try to be as positive as I can, because in some cultures of wrestling fandom, there are some places that tries to look at wrestling from a cynical point of view and they try to, tear it down if it's something that they don't like. Mm-hmm. I try to talk about it in a way that gives off the impression that when I may not like a thing, I'm not going to tear it apart. I'll just talk about why I may not like it, but then still acknowledge it as part of the evolution of wrestling and in the evolution of the show that's on. And try to talk about it in a way that isn't, that it would come off like I hate wrestling or something like that. So really, that's the motivation of the Hardy Wrestling Podcast, is to talk about it in a chill, positive, and passionate way. So that's how it started, and I'm really happy that I've started it. It's got over 80 episodes now. It's opened many doors for me in the sense that I get to work with another show, Women's Wrestling Talk, on Fite TV with so many other amazing women in wrestling media. And I also get to be a commentator for the BellaDonna Division here in Gadsden, Alabama, which is an all-female wrestling promotion ran by women. And I'm just really happy with everything that it's done. And I feel a sense of purpose from it. Like, it's great. I love what I do. And it's beautiful.
You mentioned the BellaDonna Division. What has been sort of the most impactful moment working with them so far?
So far, we just had the most impactful moment that I believe we've had was a few weeks ago when we had our third event, Coronation, where we had a tournament to crown our first ever Forbidden Elegance champion. The person who won the tournament was the Golden One, Cassandra Golden. She's been featured on AEW and Impact Wrestling before, and just seeing how she's grown as an athlete, and I've actually had her as a guest on my show, and just watching her perform, in 4 matches against some of the best women's wrestlers in the country, for her to, be able to win this match and become our first champion was really impactful. And then, to do it in the midst of, a pandemic and stuff, and still figuring out, her career and where she's going to go. It's just really beautiful to watch a first ever champion, rise and then be able to call that action, it's just really great. And I felt like that was one of the most impactful moments we've had. There have been so many, but so far, but that's been one of the most impactful moments we've had.
You said when you started, and when anyone starts a podcast, like you don't really know what you're doing, but it seems like you caught on real fast. You're a great host. Did you like have any host sort of muses when you started, or any commentators that you sort of pulled inspiration from? Because for me, it's like I loved TRL when I was growing up on MTV, so I really love Carson Daly and Dave Holmes. So that's what I pull from. So what about you?
Wow. That's a pretty deep question. Some of my muses in starting the podcast was this one woman here in Birmingham. Her name is Tasha Simone. She is a radio host and I believe a creative director of Hot 1077 here. And I've been listening to her for years, and it's just like the way that she would talk about certain subjects or certain gossip during her Hot Flash segment. Like anytime I would listen to it, I just felt like I was talking to, like, you know, the girl up the block, you know, who has all the gossip on people. Like that. She was one of my muses, and in terms of hosting and stuff like that. And I've also believed, to a certain degree, I would also say Chris Jericho was one, because his wrestling podcast called Talk is Jericho was the first wrestling podcast I ever listened to. I would say he was definitely one of them early on as well. So, and also in terms of commentary, another muse that I have is Corey Graves, because he used to be a wrestler, but he had to stop due to injury. But him being able to use his voice and speak to things in a way that just sounds really witty and charming, and also very angry at times, and him also pulling in pop culture references and stuff like that. Like the way he does it is just really cool. And so I would say those are probably the three biggest muses that I had.
And also this year, Twitter reminded us that you have to tweet your dreams into existence, and one of yours is to be the first Black female commentator for the WWE. What do you think achieving that would do as far as the fan base is concerned? Because like I said, there weren't like a lot of Black women when I watched, but now there are, but on the wrestling side. So what do you think seeing someone like you on the commentator side would do for young girls who are into wrestling?
Well, I'm happy you noticed that. I didn't think anybody would notice that tweet as much as they did, but just the fact that you noticed that, I'm really happy you brought that up. I think that the impact that would have on young Black girls who watch wrestling, it would make them feel like their opinions about something that they love are valid, because at times, even the athletes, the Black female athletes at times, feels like there's like a small cluster of fans that doesn't appreciate them and makes them feel like they have to do twice as much to get half as much as the recognition. Sometimes it makes them feel like, you know, they just, you know, they're being bullied, or feels like they're being, you know, cast aside and no one cares about them and stuff like that. A lot of the times Black women have had to sort of, you know, take their place at the risk of being labeled as too much of something or too little of something. But if someone were to see me, and I hope that this happens even now, even though I'm just, you know, starting and stuff, I hope that when people hear me and when people see me doing what I do in terms of wrestling, they feel like someone sees them and someone hears them and that they feel like somebody can understand them. And I'm hoping that I can be a good example to them, to show them what it means to sort of push past all the negativity and continue to take your place where you feel like you belong, because nobody can tell you you belong in a certain place. You know, only you can define that and decide that for yourself. So if I do, or when I do become the first Black female commentator for WWE, NWA, or Impact, or even AEW or something like that, I hope that when little Black girls see me, they see a version of themselves that loves something so much that they're willing to talk about it and share their knowledge about it in a way in which their intelligence is not only validated but respected. And if I am the one to put that out there for them and to be that example for them, then I am very open to that. So that's just what I hope is happening now and what continues to happen in the future.
Wonderfully said. And you said all these beautiful, inspiring things, but we're going to go from super serious and inspiring to a little silly, because I do want to bring a little bit of your Grey's Anatomy fandom into this. Who would you say was the McSteamy and the McDreamy of the current WWE roster?
Ooh. That's
we
funny.
have highs and lows here on Crushgasm.
That's funny. I would say the McSteamy is Roman Reigns.
I see that.
He is definitely the McSteamy, because it's just like, even though he's not really a kind of like a sidekick to a person, he's more so standing on his own. He's so McSteamy that it's just like the heat just radiates off the television for him.
It's the stare, it's the smolder.
Yes. It's the hair, it's everything. It's everything. Like, it's him and his swagger. It's the fact that he believes in himself, and he calls himself, the tribal chief, the head of the table. He's in God mode and all that. Like, that's him. Like, that's McSteamy right there. Now, as far as McDreamy goes, my gosh, that one's hard. That's really hard. I almost want to say Roman Reigns again, because he's the most dreamiest and the most McSteamiest out of everybody. Like, he just has sex appeal. He's just there.
So Meredith Grey she wouldn't even have to choose. If she went to the WWE, she would just pick Roman Reigns.
Yes, because he's the finest man there.
Currently. I have to give it up for Jeff Hardy in the past.
Yeah.
So we're also going to do a quick speed round all about the WWE. All right, best entrance song. And this can be current. It could be from when you watch with your grandma and your dad to now.
Rob Van Dam.
Here's a good one. Who's got the best signature move?
Bianca Belair.
What's your favorite match of all time up until today at this point in history?
Sasha Banks versus Bayley at NXT TakeOver Brooklyn.
All right. And who has the best look from the early 90s?
The Hardy Boys.
That's right. And which current WWE superstar do you see being an icon like Stone Cold or The Rock?
Bianca Belair.
All right, that's all I have for you. So can you tell listeners what they can expect from the Hardy Wrestling Podcast and all the other amazing things you have going on?
Okay, well, for the Hardy Wrestling Podcast, I put out my first episode of the new season 4 last week. It's called Still I Rise, where I talk about everything that I've been doing in wrestling and out of wrestling since the new year has started. And I also have news and gossip-ish on there, and I recap what happened on Raw, Impact Wrestling, and SmackDown. And I won't be having a new episode this week, but I will more likely have one next week, and then the week after that I'll be celebrating the Hardy Wrestling Podcast 2nd anniversary. And I'm also selling merchandise on tpublic.com/Hardy Wrestling Podcast store. You can find that on TeePublic. And with Women's Wrestling Talk, where we have new episodes every Wednesday on Fite TV and on other social media platforms as well. And with the BellaDonna Division, we're preparing for our 4th event, Exodus. But that isn't going to be at the 300 Arena in Gadsden, Alabama. That's actually going to be in Illinois. So if you're in the Illinois area, please check us out. Please buy our tickets. They're $20. We have the best of women's wrestling in the South coming up to you guys. So that's really all I have going on. It's enough. But yeah.
That's a lot of things. Like, I'm like, oh, tomorrow I might go get coffee or something. Might edit a podcast. You're like, boom, 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 boom. So, can you tell people where they can find you online?
Yes, you can find me, Stephanie Hardy, at Instagram and Twitter at Queen Steph Hardy. And you can also follow my podcast page, The Hardy Wrestling Podcast, on Instagram at Hardy Wrestling Podcast and on Twitter at Hardy Wrestle Pod.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about wrestling and your WWE crush. And everyone, you can find all of Stephanie's information below. And until next time, keep crushing it.